like it mirrors. My external reality mirrors my internal reality. Have you had that?
I've literally said the exact same words. Like, and I've noticed the same thing, that generally whenever I'm like externalizing things and I'm like getting really attached to external things and like really angry, it's generally because there's something inside myself that I'm not processing right. That's what I've noticed. And I've noticed, like, as I've turned my sight more inward, my grip on all these external things just loosens, and I kind of realize that it was all kind of a fabrication. Like this, it's basically the crap I tell myself.
Exactly.
You know, the narrative.
Now, I'm going to interrupt for a second, because those who are joining in our conversation, this is Brien Foster Allen, musician, philosopher, poet, so many other things, and we're having a conversation. Now, continue. And so in this healing place, where we're getting a chance now to heal in real time, okay, well, I see, well, how can I be compassionate toward Dennis? What are the ways that I can do that? I've started to meditate. I started to look inside and to see those places that I'm holding something against myself. You're doing the same? In your way?
Trying to, as much as I can. Honestly, you pose a really good question, because my gaze was like, really, it was an honest question inside myself. Like, yeah, I'm trying to, as much as I can. It's hard though sometimes. Sometimes you hit those stumbling blocks and your ego will immediately judge you, and it's just like a learned behavior. It's like, you shouldn't be doing that. And it's like, well, actually, if you consider all the environmental factors, my genetics, my upbringing, all these things, I should be doing these things, even though like society or my parents or somebody trained me to judge myself for this. It's like, no, by the laws of causation alone, I should be doing these things. So they may not be the most optimal things, but they're happening because of prior causes.
Exactly.
And so I guess that's kind of how I bring compassion to myself, is I had to kind of create like a philosophical manifold. And my philosophical manifold ultimately comes down to like the scientific method, I guess. That's really how I look at things. And the whole cornerstone of the scientific method is it's about diagnosing prior causation. So it's basically saying, I hypothesize this happens because of this, we test it. And all that is doing is just testing the chain of causality. And when you go over and over and over, you start to see patterns, and that's where we diagnose these laws, constructions. Exactly. But it's all just causation and mapping how reality works. And so when you realize that we're just kind of part of this reality, just the same as everything else, kind of part of this giant chemical reaction, you kind of realize causation applies to people too.
Absolutely.
And so does free will even exist? Kind of. Sort
exactly. Of. It kind of sort of exists. And
sort of.
One of the things that I'm interested in, because I've been thinking about quantum consciousness and exactly what does this mean? What does it mean? I mean, do I have, if I observe something, like if I observe a photon, I mean, it can collapse from a wave or a particle, depending upon whether or not I observe it. What?
Crazy.
I mean, really, what is that? What is that? And so I'm wondering whether or not, because I haven't been able to determine that place where that quantum effect stops. There's not an exactly, it's beyond a Planck length, but it's somewhere that it stops. But I'm not sure whether it's because we believe or whether or not it really does stop. So my question is that in this reality, in this macro reality, how much influence does our observing something have on people, on the situation, on society as a whole, and what if it would make a difference?
That's a great question, and I hope we find the answer.
Because that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at, because what I'm finding is that if I am willing to look on a situation, look on a person, look on this with greater compassion, I'm seeing wonderful things come out of it. Now, I don't know whether it's just that I'm paying attention or whether or not something's happening, and I'm not sure that it matters. But it is. It's making a difference. How I observe something makes a tremendous difference in whether or not.
Absolutely. And part of me feels like sometimes it's both. Sometimes the environment is so overpowering that you just see things a certain way based on the environment. And then other times your conscious grip from brief moment, fleeting moment, you actually have the ability to have your perception dominate circumstance. And so it's this weird push-pull straddling around this like zero plane
Yeah.
of the observer or whatever it is, you know, and it's hard to say. But yeah, I've noticed the same thing. Like when you kind of observe reality compassionately, it kind of allows for you to have compassion
Yep.
for yourself, and that kind of radiates outwards, like via causality. Really, that's kind of what allows me to have a lot of empathy for people, is because I realize that people, when I say the sentence like people should be a certain way, I know it's really ultimately illogical.
Yeah.
It's completely illogical. People are what they are. And the more you wrestle with reality and should them, the less compassion you can have for them.
Exactly. And the more, whenever I do that, the less I'm having for myself.
Yeah. Because you're shitting yourself.
Exactly. It is my own. It is my own limiting, and there's where my limiting behavior. Because I want to be. I was talking before the show, and we were having a conversation about comparisons and how comparisons are such killers to creativity. I mean, that does it for me. That the instant I begin to compare myself and the beginning to say, well, you know, I can do this better, or I can do this worse, or I'm somewhere, it's gone. I have now joined the world, and I cannot be the most unique me and precious me that I can be.
Absolutely. It squashes creativity, because a comparison is an avenue for judgment, and it's really hard to separate like emotions and one's own biases and attachments from those judgments. It's really hard to just rationally compare, like, oh, this is different in this way,
Yep.
without getting caught up in the emotions of that. It's really hard.
How do you see, you're 27 years old this year, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, and I'm 70 this year, so tell me about the generation. I'm not asking you to make generalities about your generation, but that's a lie. I am asking you to make some generalities of your generation from your observations of what do you think is going on out there, because I feel a great deal of hope, but I'm an optimist, and so that's my set point is hopefulness. But because when I look in the eyes when I meet you, and I see how deeply thoughtful and interested and engaged you are, I go, holy smoke, the world's going to be fine.
I feel simultaneous hope and despair. Depends on, I guess, what side of the bed I woke up on, which side it airs to. If I'm being honest, like, did I eat pizza the night before? Did I hit the gym yesterday?
Yeah.
Things like that. But I don't know. It's like I see through time a bit of a zigzagging. Like people will push one way as a response to how things were previously.
Yep.
And there's almost always a bit of a oversimplification or an overshooting of the target. And so through history, you'll see like a push-pull between conservatism and liberalism. And it's like, the reality is kind of like in between the cracks.
Thank you. It's all in the gray.
It's in the gray. And we just kind of it's just humans trying to overcome, I feel like, the sabotaging effects of the ego.
Thank you.
Which is built into our meat suits for survival. So it's like, we're doing the best we can. We're kind of getting there, but it takes a lot of effort to steer the ship, because everybody kind of does this like mob mentality thing. Yep. And so right now, we're encountering a lot of issues that need attention.
Right.
A lot of issues.
And they're reaching up. That's why they're standing up and saying,
oh, absolutely.
Pay attention.
Like Me Too. You know, and it's so important to acknowledge that women go through an awful time with like sexual assault and things like that. At the same time, I've noticed a lot of people in my generation will go so far, one way or the other, that they kind of just miss the reason in it.
Exactly.
And so I see that in every generation.
Yep.
That usually with every generation, there's a few big questions and a few important issues that we address, and the truth is in there.
Yep.
And we all learn from it, but everybody just kind of goes a little crazy around it. So that's kind of what's happening here too, is I see human nature just repeating cyclically, just in a different context with different technology, different questions, different times. a different zeitgeist. But it's kind of just this. We're addressing important questions that need to be addressed, and I just pray that we can sift through the bias
Exactly.
and our own delusions and our pain, because our upbringings taint our lenses so much to the point to where when we look at a problem, we see our lives and our families instead of how it could be another way for someone else.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's hard.
I wanted to ask you something about the ego, because I've been thinking about that, and I think of the metaphor as what does a healthy ego seem like? Like, what is a healthy body? I mean, a healthy body can either be undernourished and underfed and starved, like an ego can be undernourished, underfed, and starved, or an ego can be overfed and just absolutely glutted, and just like a body can. There also there must be a healthy place, a place in the middle where the ego can be fed nutritional. And so I'm working in that place to where I can see that there is a nutrition, rather than making the ego my enemy or trying to eliminate the ego or doing any of the things that in the philosophy, however I may have misread it, was what we were trying to obliterate. Does any of that resonate?
100%, because I used to, like, as I aged, I became increasingly aware of my ego. And that there was a separation between, like, my ego, and
Sure.
me.
Yeah.
And the observer is starkly different than the narrative.
Yeah.
And so, as I became aware of it, I realized about the negative effects of the ego. And so I, in turn, was like, well, ego is bad. And in reality, there are also very positive aspects to the ego.
Absolutely.
And as I aged and gained more experience and educated myself, I kind of realized that the ego is a requisite of survival and a kind of a precondition of being human. So it's less about abolishing it and more about, like you said, optimizing it and getting it to this, like, balanced state. Absolutely resonates with me. And do I know what a healthy ego looks like? No, I've never seen one.
No.
Mine's certainly not healthy.
Well, but here's where I'm thinking about. And I'm thinking about it, the difference between a binary state, a 0 and a 1, on or off, healthy or unhealthy, or a gradient, if I'm somewhere between 0 and 1. So let's say that my ego happens to be at a point 463. Okay? That's where it is. Now, if I can, what are the ways that I can do to get it more toward the 1? That's just moving it a little bit, because in terms, I am moving in the positive direction. Even the tiniest move in the positive direction is big damn win. Rather than trying to get to this on-off switch, okay, now I have a healthy ego and I'm all, because that to me is the lie.
It doesn't exist. It's an abstraction.
Yeah,
It's the only thing that exists is the real, the here and the now.
exactly.
And all we can do is push our causal chain a little in the right direction. It's like Sam Harris kind of said once, that it's like you can't be faulted for having your intrinsic environmental and genetic weaknesses. It's not my fault my dad was an alcoholic and drank himself to death.
Or my mom too, exactly the same.
And thus, as a consequence of the trauma, I developed BPD as a psychological defense.
Sure.
Hypersensitive demeanor coupled with trauma generally results in that. But it's up to me to manage that, and like you said, kind of push that as far as I can.
Right.
Realistically, humanly, in a healthy direction. And at the same time, you kind of have to accept that you'll never hit this ideal.
Nope.
But you have to realize the ideal is an abstraction. Does it even exist?
It doesn't exist, and I don't think it does. But the lessons that you can give, and the lessons that you can, by walking through the healing process, that's the gift. Because I get a chance to sit here with you. I get a chance to sit with another person who has gone through what I went through and is working toward healing and working toward compassion. And that to me is grace.
It's brutal, because my father was like 56 when he died, and he could hardly admit he had a problem. And I guess my solace is in being 26 and going to a therapist and saying, the last 2 years have been really hard. I know something's wrong.
Yep.
And then diagnosing, like propositioning to my therapist, hey, I hypothesize this is what's wrong, because I did research.
Sure.
And I was like, this is the only thing that fits my symptoms. I know that it's not everyone else's fault here.
Yep.
Like, I know these situations are volatile, and I see what's going on with them.
Yep.
And they're making mistakes, but I'm clearly overreacting in these ways. And I saw a core pattern in my issues because I was looking at myself scientifically. And I wasn't afraid to admit I'm clearly overreacting or I'm wrong here. And so I'm like, okay, well, I can handle this better, but it's uncontrollable to me. So it's like, how do I deal with this? Well, therapist, help me, because this is inside my head. And yeah. So.
All right, I don't mean to cut you off in this sense, but what I would like to do is that what I find is that this is a human disease. It's across humanity, not just through alcoholism, because we can take anything that I take outside of myself to fix that hole inside of myself. Anytime I take something outside, nothing will fill it. Nothing. It doesn't matter whether it's sex, drugs, attention, success, whatever it is. One of the questions I ask him, and I do communication coaching as a practice, as making my living until this television show and other work continue to succeed, is that I ask, what is enough? What would be enough? Would you know? Have you actually set? And I don't mean just you, but I ask the people. I say, well, what is enough? What would you know if you got there? Once you got there and went, okay, I've got enough. And it's a question that I don't that we haven't considered. And I think it's an important question to think about.
Yeah, I guess it's up to the person, right?
Yeah. So where are you going? What are the things that are on your plate? What are the things you're interested in right now, Brien?
Well, I would say my healing and my music. Predominantly those, also my education. I may go back to school later in life, but that's a bit on the horizon.
Good. Are you writing? Are you playing? Are you doing how does your musical your music manifest itself?
That's what do you mean?
Are you playing? Are you going out to doing gigs? Are you working with a band? Are you doing how does the stage look like for you at this time?
Right now, it's kind of in development. Working on a couple projects. I have like 3 irons in the fire. One of them is kind of like a side project, and then the other 2 we're working on finalizing our albums and stuff.
Congratulations!
Indeed, thank you. I've been like building my Instagram, getting my presence up, getting like my material out there, trying to look as like professional as I possibly can, because I feel like I put myself out in an unprofessional way years ago.
Yeah.
And I feel like you're just cheating yourself if you undersell yourself. So I figured I'd just do myself justice, because I felt like I deserved it. And
do you have a practice regimen? Do you have a regimen where you get up in the morning and practice a certain amount of time and write, or have you come into that, or what's your creative process?
It's more daily. It's like by the day I'll have band practices, and just me and my buddies will get together, and there's so many different ways to like make something. That's the cool part about it. You can write a song around any instrument, from the drums up, or from the vocals down, or from somewhere in between outwards.
Yes.
And then you can collaboratively create, you can individually create, you can kind of almost leave it up to chaos and just like kind of chop and screw things together and then learn it as it's been randomized.
Wow.
Things like that. So
you have to really trust to do something like that, and your bandmates, and I love the process. When I was growing up, anytime I heard harmony, that just got me. And I just love harmony. There's just something about how that happens when 2 voices blend, and I love that. And I find that same way when 2 people are riffing and are really talking about things that are deeply important and valuable. That to me it's a conversational harmony.
it is. It's like it just fits. It's like you don't have to try that hard. You just exist.
Yeah.
And it spontaneously happens.
How has your spiritual evolution been? Where have you been with this concept that we think of as that is talked about in humanity as God, but whatever that, people use that term, but but then what the hell are we talking about? I mean, what does that mean? There's no, like Feynman said, right? God is too big for the stage, so there's no way to. So what is your journey onto this, to a power greater than yourself, or the cosmos, or whatever?
I feel like in my journey through healing and introspection, I found my own version of God. I really definitely did, and I think that's really what's brought me to a much better place.
That's so cool.
But it's the most nuanced version of God I've found yet, but it's the only thing that makes sense to me, so it's something that works for me.
I love that what you said about making sense, because that's what it had to be for me. All because I have a very sensical point of view. If it doesn't make sense to me, if I'm not able to at least get to the precipice through my rational mind, I ain't gonna get there. If there is something that is so irrational that I can't, I'm not gonna play there. And it's not a question of faith. I have faith that God is cooler than I can possibly even connect with.
Yeah, God's somewhere between faith and reason, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Literally, like in between.
Exactly.
It's like in the intuition, and it's like for me, my version of God makes rational sense, and it also makes an intuitive sense and an emotional sense.
Yes.
And so there's
God,
harmony.
that's beautiful.
Harmony on the tiers of perceiving God, and that's for me. It's God is. You said, well, God's too big for the stage. That quote you said earlier, and I feel like my definition is simply put as possible would be God is the stage.
Absolutely.
And everyone on it, and the air,
and backstage, and the air, and everything in between, and all of it, or where there is not. And I was thinking about
God
that the
is the
other day,
actors,
that the only thing that whatever is absent from God, that's the illusion. That's the place of saying that there is such a thing as a place apart from this stage, because there's not. It's all the stage. It's all
one, and it's like all these little, like, oh, that's a person versus that's a chair. It's like all that is just like a dashed line around
Right.
an arbitrary space on a napkin.
Yeah.
Take away the dashed lines, like erase them, and then that's God.
Yeah.
Self, just dashed lines.
That's a beautiful way to put it. That really that gives me a deeper understanding, and that's what I love about is that there are layers upon layers upon layers, and I'll get to another layer, and there'll be another layer of understanding. There'll be another layer and another layer, and we just keep getting there, and so it becomes the part of saying, okay, journey, destination, journey. This is part of this wonderful process.
Yeah, the destination. I used to be so obsessed with it.
I know.
It's like the more obsessed you are, the more you just suffer.
But that's the world. I mean, I'm going to be talking with one of the Tuck Kamen, who's one of the great advertising executives who has been in during this time, and that was his whole job. That's his whole job in advertising, is to say, hey, there is something out there that's going to make it for you. It's going to be and we've all bought into it, and we've all bought into it in this culture.
The American dream.
Yeah.
In some capacity.
So, do you see the American dream changing? I mean, do you see what does it look like for your bandmates and your friends? How does it look? How is it evolving?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's like, how has the American dream changed for me, and how does it resonate with me and my bandmates now?
That term.
It's changed immensely. Like, at this point for me, I feel like it's just living and dying on my own terms. But back in the day, I felt like it kind of revolved around a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's more about the intangibles. I just want the chance to reach and impact people.
Yeah.
Because if like my suffering can help lessen the suffering of others, then the suffering wasn't so in vain.
That's a tremendous, and so it's finding those avenues then.
Yes.
The avenues and different ways that you, like through your music, that you can touch people and let people know that there is that. To me, see, that's the hopefulness I was talking about. That's what I feel. I feel so empowered when I hear you talk about that. When I hear you talk about the process and where you're going. I mean, that's what's fun. So what are you? You have a physical part of your healing, an emotional part of your healing, and a spiritual part of your healing. They're all happening at the same time.
Indeed.
And you see that, and globally, are you? Because there is something about it. Feels to me that when the internet connected, that we lit up a global consciousness of humanity. That suddenly we there was an awakening, almost like a sentience 2.0 that was happening, because just artificially I can virtually instantly connect with anyone around the world, which is so much different than what it was before we flipped that switch.
It's a beautiful change. It's like on par with the Gutenberg revolution.
It has to be. It has to be to say. I mean, and of course we're gonna screw it up. We're gonna have our own challenges and figuring out, well, how do we deal with this mass media, and how do we deal with this instantaneous connection, and how do we use it? How do we misuse it? And what do we do in going forward? That's the always in the details, right? I mean, we gotta figure out how to do it.
With great power comes great responsibility.
It does with everything everything that I have seen, Brien, is that I can have this opportunity. I can have this opportunity to be able to create and to have the kinds of conversations, and we can say, if I can be as real and as present with you at this instant, I'm doing everything I can possibly do. This is it. This is all we can do. If any moment in history is relevant, is important, is vital, then it might as well be this moment. Let's choose that. What am I waiting for? What am I holding back for? And so that's a big part of my story, because I want to be I am continuing to be an evolving person. You committed to evolution when you went to therapy, when you decided that you were going to be willing to go to therapy.
It was a divergent path from my father. He would refuse therapy and treatment in acknowledging his demons, so I figured I would just choose a different path.
And when you notice that over the course of history, what happens when somebody in the inflection points just says, okay, well, we're going to right here, this is where it's going to be different.
Rock bottom.
Yeah.
Like, you have to go through hell. That's really, like, I feel like that's the utility of suffering, because it's like you can't really do it without it. You have to be pushed against the wall, and you have to